Welcome back to Global Crossroads. I'm Bryan Hull, and our guest today is Takako Yamaguchi. Welcome, Takako.
Thank you.
It's a very special guest because I want to tell you that Takako was on my hiring committee so many years ago.
Oh my.
And anyone who's on your hiring committee, you have a special bond with them for the rest of your tenure at a place. So thank you for coming in. I would like to start by asking you what life was like when you were a kid.
When I was a kid.
Yeah, describe it for us.
Not mentioning what year you was.
Right.
Okay.
Somehow avoiding that.
Okay, I'll talk around that year. Let's see. My parents were always working. They owned a small business, and as many people, I've heard people say, when you own a small business, business owns you. No vacation that we can think of.
Wow.
Every day, and I never saw them stop working for the day until after midnight. That was just a customary thing for us.
Wow.
So they were not what you call salaryman or company employees. So they are, I would say, lower middle class if you're going to label in that way.
Right, right.
So that's how I grew up.
Huh. You know, we think of the American view of Japan, and we always hear that Japan is a middle class country. And so that sort of colors my view of Japan. And I'm curious, so as you were going to school, what obstacles did you feel like you had to overcome? If any, maybe you didn't feel like there were obstacles. Whereas, for example, maybe middle class students or upper middle class students were didn't have the same obstacles. Did you experience that?
Growing up in Japan?
Yeah.
So I think one thing to mention at first would be in Japan, and trying to avoid today of making too much of generalization, too much of specifics, but somewhere in the middle. Most people in Japan, when we hear the word middle class, we automatically think of upper middle class. Middle class to me is not really middle class. Middle class is more or less people who don't have to worry about the day-to-day situations, and they will be upper middle class. So interesting thing is in my high school senior year, in Japan, many of the schools will have, and each generation goes through differences in trend to economic situation as a nation and so forth. So, we've gone through many changes in Japan, but in my generation when I was growing up, it was very typical for each school to have required uniform. It's not so much about uniform like, wow, designer so-and-so created. It's not so much of that, but it was something that children of families of different socioeconomic background, all across the board, they could all wear the same looking uniform. So that was one. And so one thing that I want to share with you is something that happened in my senior year, high school year. All along, not so much me personally, but some of my classmates in a senior class, we kept fighting with that school administration team about, why no perm for the girls, permanent. You cannot have perm.
This
no
was
perm,
a rule that you couldn't have?
Yeah, so no
strange. Perm
for girls, no makeup, no, and I was gonna say one more, there was third one. So it was no, and no. So we kept saying, okay, no regular street clothes. So we kept saying, well, so what can we have, And it's certainly, definitely not makeup. That's not allowed in school premises. So So our senior class said, what about getting rid of so-called required uniform? Well, the interesting thing is, so we took a vote. And even though we're the one who started saying, how can we avoid school rules, and one of which is to get rid of the required uniform. But after all, students took a vote, and then majority won, and we wanted to keep the uniform.
Wow.
So that's one story. And the other story is when I was in a little bit further back, middle school, one of my classmates wore her long sleeve wintertime school uniform, but always she had these patches on her elbow. Mine didn't have it because my parents had to cough up the money to buy me one girl's uniform and then my brother boy's uniform. But obviously this classmate of mine had to go through hand-me-down. Right. And so I could see. But what impressed me about her, and I forgot her name now, but I can see that she was always, how do you say, really a good student, you know, and well liked by everyone, and I was just always impressed. And that having the patches on her elbow didn't, you know, phase her a bit. And so anyway, going back to what was it like growing up in Japan, I think these school uniforms and yet required, so some of us students try and rebel against that idea of, you know, being required and why can't we wear what we wanted to wear. But then bottom line though, it kind of cut across all these socioeconomic background. Didn't matter where you're coming from.
Right.
And that
the
was,
uniform.
Yeah. That was really a cool thing that that vote in high school senior year showed, that we actually recognized that and we kept it.
So supposedly that's why Catholic schools in the U.S., they have uniforms as well to make it so that clothes don't become a class marker of who has money and who doesn't. So it's interesting. So how did you, so Portland's a very long way from Tokyo, so how did you get from Tokyo to here? What were some of the important moments that got you here? Not so much about immediately why did I come to Oregon, or why did I end up coming to PCC and so forth, but how do I say? Let me think for just a moment. Way back when, I think I was in high school. Compulsory education in Japan requires that all the students start learning English, at least in reading and writing, since 7th grade. So middle school and sort of high school. So at least reading and writing. But it's not like all of your teachers actually spoke English either. Reading and writing, yes, but not so much speaking and listening. So because of that, particularly with my generation, it was very rare that if I were to bring an American friend to my junior high, or which I did actually, but later on, and then or into high school, actually my teachers would be able to understand American friends. It was really rare. You brought an American friend to your high school? To middle school, I did. Where'd you meet these American friends? So that's something kind of interesting, little personal story, is that I had many, how do I say, dreams growing up. Like, let's do this, let's do that. And wanted to go to Africa, wanted to go to China, and then somehow ended up in the US and so forth. But these childhood dreams. But so one of my childhood dreams is based on the old Japanese novel called 24 Eyes. 24 eyes? Like eyes as in your face? Yeah. And it's about this school teacher teaching in this remote island off of Japanese main island, but we have many small islands, right? And then so that notion really stuck with me. So over the years, I had many different kind of dreams. Some came true and some did not come true. But one of which was to become a school teacher, and be it
U.S. or Africa or wherever I wanted to go.
Those are such different places, like Africa or the U.S.
Right. And I wanted to be, at one point or another, real life Jane Goodall Japanese version, which didn't count. Okay.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
This is a side I didn't know of you. Your
yeah.
Save the Great Apes side.
No. So one of the times, so I think it was in my early high school years, I just somehow, and maybe my mother probably had a lot to do with, has influenced me over the years to, what can you be doing instead of this? So what would you like to do? And what's possible? And so forth. So anyway, maybe she's the one who planted that idea in my mind, in which I just don't remember about it. But anyway, I ended up walking into a Air Force base, which is located suburban Tokyo.
Air Force base?
Air Force base. It's a base called Yokota, and American accent would be Yokota. But anyway, so in the Air Force base, I noticed that there are school children. So that means they have to go to school. So one day, I actually called up the school. And
you called up the school?
I called up the school. I had these notes, and I told my students about it too, because speaking on the telephone scared me like crazy. So I have to make up a notebook that says, if she says yes, say this. If she says no, say this. And I have this language mapping notebook. So I rehearsed it, and then made an appointment.
But who did you say you were? Like, hi, I'm... Like, how did you explain yourself? Like, hi, I want to talk to American students?
I was a student, and I walked into the elementary school. I was a high school schooler, but elementary school principal's office. And I don't remember, sorry to say I don't remember her name now, but so, and I told her, I said, I'm a Japanese person and a student, would like to learn English, and I have been practicing, and I'd like to know if I could be a volunteer at your school. So very graciously, she said, let me introduce you to Mrs. So-and-so. So she took me over to face Maeda, and so Maeda sensei, who was a second grade teacher at that school. And she was from Hawaii originally, so Japanese American women teaching at an American school, elementary school in Tokyo. So that kind of started my journey in
meeting Americans, but also you were very, I don't know how much you thought through this, but you were very smart, because if your education emphasized reading and writing, that allowed you to work on your speaking and listening too. That was very smart of you. Did you think of it that way, or did you not even think of it? You just sort of did something without thinking about it, like, why am I doing this?
I think I was just looking for some fun ways. That's about it. Just something fun to do, instead of cramming for vocabulary quiz, and which my teachers were wonderful, very patient, and encouraging, but after all, they did have, their curriculum and Ministry of Education based goal lines, and so much vocabulary to conquer.
Right. Same as here, supposedly. Yeah. So, any immigrant who comes to a new place, they have to decide what are the things they're going to hold on to from their old culture, and what are the things either thankfully they're going to leave behind or regretfully leave behind. You can't bring your entire culture with you, because you wouldn't, it would just be impossible, I would think. So what did you decide, either that you were going to leave behind regretfully or thankfully, and then what did you hold on to? Like, no matter what happens, no matter how many years in the U.S., I'm going to always be X. Like, what did you hold on to?
If you ask me the same question, maybe 3-5 years down the road again, my answers might be different. But keeping my response and my ideas might change over time. But one of the things that I thought about is initially, although I'm not really a religious person myself, growing up in Japan, you just, how do you say, religion and philosophy and over the centuries, whatever the culture that how do you say, embraces you, it's all about that. And it's so, whether you're a religious person or not doesn't matter. It's like anywhere from birth to, all throughout your marriage and everything into the end of your life, the funeral and everything. It's all based on their culture and religion. So you cannot get away with it. So initially when I struggled with that idea, so struggle meaning that I really did think about it. What do I have to leave behind, and what can I keep, and what's the cost of it, and can I afford it? Would I like to afford it? That. So religion or not, that was really the big thing in my mind initially, and I really personally struggled because if I were to have a family, then and if I'm fortunate to have children, then what would my children learn from? So having a home and family in that way. So I thought about, and initially that was a very tricky thing in my mind. And it was just really a struggle in my mind for a while. Now, after having gone through it and then looking back, I don't think I ever got that answer, but over the year, in answer meaning to that struggle or question of, can I keep it, can I not keep it, and would I be disrespectful to people who are around me working in this country and community, and would I stand out too much with my children fit in, that sort of thing. This whole issue was just really too big of a thing for me to handle.
You're sure that's true? It seems, maybe unconsciously you figured it out?
Maybe.
Because, like, for example, I noticed that when we're in a meeting, since you and I have been in meetings for so many years, that's a place where I feel like you hold on to your culture. Like, I'm not going to be like all these other obnoxious Americans that I'm in a meeting with, right? You seem, in those meetings, you seem like I'm going to be very respectful. I'm going to know my role in this meeting. That's something that you stick to. Would you say that's true?
I think yes. And maybe I labeled things initially. I labeled things too rigidly, like this is religion, so what am I going to do with it? And here's my Japanese culture, and then part of it is so tied so closely to it. So what am I going to keep and what I'm not going to keep? So I just really, really struggled with that notion. But over the years, what I really found out was the very basic, most important thing would be, your core of yourself, which would be just be a good person. so trying to keep that, and I think that has a lot to do with now we call it Skype, but in those days costly telephone calls. But to my mother, it had a lot to do with it. And it's not like she and I have the most wonderful, peaceful conversations over the years all the time either. We argue too. Right. And she is saying, okay, this is the way how it is, and how could you detour away so much, and how could you say that, and how would you? And I said, no, I'm still trying to be respectful. That's not changing, but my values are different now. Or
you mean this is an argument you're having with your mom? She's saying, how can you do X, Y, and Z?
Right. And it mainly had to do with philosophical beliefs to religious beliefs, because she's very Japanese in a traditional way, of Shintoistic at the same time Buddhist way. And, so it's very different. So that's where it is. But to go back to your original question about what I hang on to and what I have come to accept it with myself is not so much about religion per se or philosophy per se, but just try my best to be a good person. So that sort of touches what we try to do in our meetings and volunteer committees and so forth is try to understand each other, differences or similarities or not, and then work together to accomplish some things. And so I really value that. So, and then your very first question today about what it was like growing up in Japan, I think that family values that my parents have instilled in me, which would be regardless of the social class or status, you just have to be working hard and, how do I say, to be able to earn your own self-respect. Because if you work hard and you say at the end of the day that you really did your best, then that's the main thing. Teary-eyed, sorry.
Wow.
Sorry. So anyway, over the years, my mother and I have had come to understand each other and then say, as long as you are keeping that, then she's okay with me.
As long as you're keeping the earning your self-respect thing?
And then, be a good person and not to intentionally, I have made mistakes over the years too, oh my gosh, but not to intentionally hurt anyone, not to step on other people's, toes on purpose. And so those are very important to me, and so my father passed away a couple of years ago, but I think that's one thing that my mother and I speak, and actually she and I were talking about you last night on Skype.
Oh, wow.
And then,
I wondered how Skype, I was like, Skype, how's that going to... well, so I have a question about this. So this sense of you as a good person, I always wonder, I think a lot about this. So some people, it's important that they appear as if they're a good person. Like, so that they don't say anything that makes them look like a bad person. They don't say anything that to be hurtful, but it doesn't matter what they think on the inside about the people around them, as long as they put an importance on appearance. So they could think really mean things about the people they're around, but the appearance, as long as the appearance is fine, then... So is it important for you that you feel and think good things inside as well as how you act in the world? Are both important?
I think both important, and also the latter of what you think inside at the end of the day when I close my eyes, that's really important. And I think having grown up in suburban Japan and yet heard of some unkind comments made to me by more well-to-do classmates in schools and so forth, or even looking at people who may not have had even what my family could afford. The differences like that, I think observing the differences in that way really made me think. So in that sense, it was good that my family didn't have much money. So that's kind of a,
That's very good. That's very well put. Yeah, it's about how the pain makes you stronger. American students will say that, if it doesn't kill you, it'll make you stronger kind of concept. It's the same kind of thing.
I don't like pain.
Right. So I have one more question.
And before you go
yes,
to that,
yes.
May I add to that?
Yes, of course.
This is the reason why I had to call my mother last night, because I could not remember my paternal grandfather's first name, because you just call him grandpa and not the first name. So anyway, I'm telling the story in the wrong way, so let me see if I can fix it. There is a family called Nezu. That family is predominantly in the area of foot of Mount Fuji, so outside of Tokyo. And Nezu Kaiichiro is a second son. And he's the one who built bridges and railroad. And his museum exists in both the Yamanashi Prefecture and in downtown Tokyo.
Wow.
Now, I never met him. Well, he's deceased.
Yes.
And his eldest brother, had an eldest son, and his first name is Saju.
I hope I don't have to really be following this.
Right. Please
I'm
give me a quiz.
Lost,
Yeah. So Nezu Kaiichiro is the famous person in Japan, but his oldest brother had an eldest son, and because he remarried, he had to get rid of his eldest son's eldest son. And so that is Saju, and he was adopted into a Yamaguchi family, and Yamaguchi family has went bankrupt. So I have no ties to money, as I can tell you. But anyway.
But you adopted this person.
No. So what it is, it's even though you introduced me as Takako Yamaguchi, I really did not inherit the Yamaguchi. I don't have a Yamaguchi ancestry.
Oh. Because
Yamaguchi family adopted my great-grandfather. And my grandfather was the one who my grandfather was adopted into Yamaguchi family. So
it's interesting, throughout our half an hour together, you've mentioned several different times remembering a person's name. It's come up 3 different times. It's very important to like, I would never even have, like, someone in my middle school who I didn't remember, I wouldn't even have spent a second thinking about it, but it seems very important to you to remember these people's names. Is it a sign of respect to?
Not sure.
Yeah.
I think culturally it might be remembering person's title or remembering person's last name is important, and that is part of respect. Yeah. I think in my mind, please correct me about this, when I first started teaching here, students and staff and teachers alike, they all said it's very important that you know people's first names, so you remember first names. I had a heck of a time. I had really a challenging time trying to remember people's
first names. Huh? Well, so. Yeah, that would be hard. We're almost out of time, but I just wanted to tell you that one of the things that has always impressed me, because my office is near where you conference with students, and so I pass you talking to students term after term, year after year, and you always seem equally engaged with whoever it is. I don't know if those students need extra help, or I don't know. I never know why you're meeting with them. I always assume they need extra help, but that could be wrong. And it's always impressed me that you're the same with all of them. Like it's not like I can ever tell, oh, Takako must hate this person, or Takako really loves this student. You are equally engaged with all of them. So it's very interesting. And there's not many, like usually I can tell, like some of the people who sit next to me, I think, oh, they really hate this. When I'm listening to them, I think, oh, they hate this. But with you, I can never tell. It's very interesting. I think it's a strength.
Thank you. I don't know if I deserve that.
Yeah, because I don't think students want to know that, you know, you're extra special, or, you know. Do you think that's true?
Not sure. I'm still thinking about that question.
That
not
particular
sure.
question.
I think that going back to that doing the best you can, and you're right.
That's what, when you said that earlier, I thought of this particular.
And I'm always impressed with students, regardless of their circumstances or background, that they are always trying their best. So.
I'm not sure they're always trying their best, but you give them the benefit of the doubt.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Well, thank you so much for coming in during the summer and talking with me. I appreciate it so much, and I wish we could have like a 3-hour global Crossroads where I could hear all about each of the high school American friend. I want to hear more about that. So,
thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay.